it's hard to tell for an individual I'm speaking to whether social media is a good use of their time because it's one of those things that isn't until it is. Like I could have sunk 2.5 years into it and then stopped, and it would have been the worst use of my time. But then when it takes off, it's like exponential, and it is suddenly the best use of time at some stage as well.
Welcome to How to Build a Profitable Nutrition Business. If you love nutrition and you love helping people and you want to be in the game long enough to keep doing that, then this is the podcast for you. Let's get into it. If you work in the nutrition space and you've got a social media account, there's a fair chance you've heard of Aidan the Dietitian or Aidan Muir or Ideal Nutrition. Aidan, I heard recently at the Dietitian Australia conference, and I was glued to every word. He's just an authentic person. There's what you see is what you get. He is so honest about his experience with social media and how he has grown his social media following to now, I think, 77,000 Instagram followers. But as you'll learn today, that's not the be all and end all when it comes to getting engagement and growing your business through social media. If you can retain 10% of what Aidan shares with us today, your business is going to improve. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of How to Build a Profitable Nutrition Business. Today, I'm super excited to have a guest known as Aidan Muir, or Aidan the Dietitian, if you're on Instagram or TikTok, who has a business called Ideal Nutrition, which is a flourishing business with 10 dietitians. And Aidan is, for me, the epitome of success when it comes to social media. He's someone that I follow on Instagram. Every time his posts come up in my feed, I find myself swiping and getting to the end. He's got really engaging posts, but does it in a ethical, evidence-based way, which many, including me, tend to struggle with. And so I'm pumped to have Aidan on. I was fortunate to hear him at the DA conference a few weeks back, and I was glued to every word that he said and just basically begged him to come on the podcast and share his wisdom. So Aidan, thanks for coming on, mate. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I keen to see what we can go through today.
Yes. Mate, tell us a little bit about your background. Obviously, you're a dietitian, but a little bit about your business and your social media strategy to growing your business.
Yeah, so general summary is I view myself as part-time dietitian, part-time content creator in a way, like 50-50, maybe split it like 33-33 once you factor in the business owner type situation. But as you said, we have 10 dietitians, and I've extended that view of how I view myself onto all of the dietitians as well. They all create content. Most of them have at least one non-client facing day. So most of them are seeing around 25 clients per week. And then the rest of the time is spent on back end stuff / social media stuff, which is what really gets the clients in as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear that. So that's great to know. So around 25 clients a week, and that's a good caseload to then free up some of their content creation time.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is something I've spoken about with a bunch of other dietitians, just being like, theoretically, you can definitely see more than 40 people per week. Like, I know heaps of dietitians who do it, but then what are the downsides of that? Do you have time to do anything else? And then from a retention thing, like a little thing I've noticed is like a lot of people just get over that after a certain period of time and they want to move on to something else. But I find around 25, people can do that long term from what I've seen.
Yeah, look, mate, early on in my business, I was seeing ridiculous numbers, and that was just to keep the lights on kind of thing. And the most important outcome of that is I was a shit dietitian. You're just burnt out. You're not really providing that good a service. It was just numbers because it was kind of born out of need. I had a wife and kids and we'd started this business. But yeah, I think 25 would be a sweet spot. Yeah. Mate, we were at the conference the other week and someone asked you a question about why social media. And one of your responses, or during your talk, you were talking about early on, you were posting regularly and getting crickets. And so to give listeners a bit of a background, you've got 77,000 followers on Instagram. Which is huge. You've got 9,000 on TikTok because it's a little bit more fresh, if you like, a little newer for you. Why social media? Why, when you're getting crickets all those years ago, what made you keep going?
Yeah, the crickets thing, because to add context, it was 3 years before I first got a client through Instagram. I had started Facebook initially and I had got a few clients through there. So I had a bit of evidence that, okay, on Facebook it was working, but on Instagram, I actually hadn't got anything for the first 3 years. And I look back and ask myself that question. Like, the bit that gets me is like, why 2.5 years in did I still have the audacity to think I was going somewhere with this? But a few things. One was I read a lot of self-help books, like self-improvement things. I don't know if I want to point to this person in particular, but Gary Vaynerchuk, like I was following all of his stuff and just being like, I was very clearly seeing people succeeding with social media and getting business out of it. I'd seen that in the dietitian world as well. There was a few dietitians I'd seen who clearly were making good businesses off of it and everything. So there was enough there. And although I say, why at 2,500 did I like keep going? It was probably around 2,000 to 3,000 followers, somewhere in that range. Was, oh, I am gaining traction. This hasn't taken off yet, but things were trending in the right direction from there.
Yeah, okay, because that is persistence. Like I probably would have given up beforehand, but it was one of those things for us that we did it because we knew it wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
But we didn't focus on it was the thing.
That's actually like a little thing that I've struggled with like when I try to communicate this to other dietitians and stuff like that, just being like, it's hard to tell for an individual I'm speaking to whether social media is a good use of their time, because it's one of those things that isn't until it is. Like I could have sunk 2.5 years into it and then stopped, and it would have been the worst use of my time. But then when it takes off, it's like exponential, and it is suddenly the best use of time at some stage as well.
Yeah. So you're so you've got 10 dietitians for in Ideal Nutrition.
Yeah.
Are they like, what percentage of those is there 25 caseload online? Is it significantly?
Yeah, like 80%. Even though it sounds a bit more reality in that we are very Australia focused. I would say less than 2% of our clients are international. So we're very Australia focused, but I would say probably close to 50% Brisbane based, maybe 40 to 50% Brisbane based, which is where we are. It's just that a lot of our Brisbane based clients also see us online, because the logic I use is we do 45-minute initials, 30-minute reviews. The review sessions is where the magic happens for it being online, in that somebody could see me at 12 p.m. and it's their lunch break if they do it online. They could be at work, they could just find a room at work, something like that, see me online over Zoom. If they drove to see me, say it takes 20 minutes to come see me, 20 minutes to go back, and then there's a 30-minute consult, that's so much of their day gone. So even a lot of our Brisbane clients see us online for that reason.
Yeah, right. Okay. And I wonder, like with the algorithms and you posting consistently, unless I've missed something, like it's certainly not Brisbane specific content that you're creating, but is it just that the algorithm tends to feed the geographic area around you?
Yeah, a combination of stuff. So like how we're talking about TikTok, that was actually one of the things that I've noticed heaps. Just being like, I did a semi-viral video on lactose intolerance maybe 2 years ago. And then I went and played like basketball, like at a social basketball. And all my teammates were like, oh, I saw you on TikTok. Like it clearly skewed very heavily towards Brisbane. With Instagram, I don't think the algorithm is as heavily skewed that way. But there's a few things that I did early on that kind of started the flywheel that kind of made it stay a bit more Brisbane centric. A few angles. One is I've never tried to blow up through other strategies. Like many years ago, hashtags were quite effective in terms of like you go hashtag nutrition and it would get sent out a bit further. But who's clicking on that hashtag? It would have been like America focused or like other things. So I always avoided trying to grow through other things that would be a bit more global. And even with like, we'll talk about this later, but collaborations, I collaborate way more heavily with Australian dietitians and nutritionists than I do internationally, because do I want a bunch of European collaborations or American collaborations where I'd have to suddenly be working odd hours to service clients from those areas? But the little thing that started the flywheel that I was meant to talk about is, I don't know if I'd recommend this to people, but I'm just telling the truth. It's what I did. When I realized I was largely followed by dietitians and other nutrition professionals, and I was like, they're not my target audience. At that time, I was like, I'd love to work with more powerlifters. The thing I did was I found every powerlifting gym in Brisbane and I followed them, and I checked who was liking their most recent posts, and I started following all of those people and engaging a bit with their content. And say I followed 100 people per day, which is what I did. Not saying I recommend that, I'm just saying what I did. About 20 of those people would follow back. So suddenly I was getting like 20 new Brisbane-based followers per day, roughly. And then if I made a good post that started getting shared by people on their stories, it was Brisbane-based powerlifters who were sharing it. And that's how it started getting shared with their friends. And then their friends started following me. And that's partly what skewed it towards being Brisbane based.
Yeah, right. Wow. It's fascinating. Is it Russell Brunson? I've read that somewhere about you. You've got your top 100 and you follow them, and then it grows from there. So there's a real strategy behind it. And one of my questions was actually going to be about that, because you were talking about hashtags and not having followers overseas, because can you really service them, or do you want to service them?
Yeah.
I think people can get lost in that, some of the data behind it, looking at the total followers and people that are liking, whereas it's like, are they actually who you want? Are they your potential clients? For you, you've got 77,000 followers on Instagram. Clearly, you've managed to craft that so that they are potential clients, because your business is flourishing from that. But it is a real risk, isn't it? I know with Mealzee, like we'll post things and We were doing, there was a personal use login, but it's now just targeted at nutrition professionals, nutrition and fitness professionals. But I'm still getting people that the Joe public that are looking for a meal plan, which that's not who I want. So
Yeah.
there's a real art to try and just niche down on who you're looking for, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. And it's one of the interesting things in relation to, I remember as I was growing on Instagram, I had a bunch of my friends always like being like, how many followers are you up to now? How many followers are you up to now? And it's almost like a bit of pressure to keep growing. But at the end of the day, like it still makes sense to try to only really get people in your quote unquote target audience. I'm not going to say I'm exclusively trying to only do that at the expense of everything else, but I'm quite proud of the fact that if you check my analytics, it's 50 to 70, I'd say 50 to 60% now are Australian. And then another like 20% is American. And then the next highest is UK. And that's almost all of my followers in that kind of area. And obviously, it takes a bit of work to do it that way. Like, I'm not trying to stop other people from following me, but the target audience is mostly people in Australia.
Yeah. Oh, it's working. Like with the analytics, how much time of your content creation strategy is spent analyzing your posts or even looking at content ideas, what's trending?
Yeah, so I could go heaps of ways with this. In terms of like very short term, I spend 2 seconds after pretty much every post. Like at some stage when I'm like responding to comments, I'll just be like, how did the post go? Did it get how many likes, how many comments, how many? And I don't think about that too deeply. Like being honest, I just don't think about that too deeply. It's more just of a quick vibe check. Did this go well? Did this go poorly? And then I learn from that. But the once a month, something I implemented probably like 12 to 18 months ago, I started doing a bit more of a formal audit of my content where I just look back over the last 30 days, see what went well, see what went poorly, and try to use that to generate some ideas. So I do look at the analytics a bit closer there. But the content ideas thing that you touched on is probably where I'll go a bit deeper here. That's the hard part for me because I'm not a perfectionist. I actually post like 98 to 99% of the ideas that I have. Maybe I have a bit of a higher threshold for what I call an idea, but it's so rare for me to start creating a post and then pull out halfway through. Like I pretty much have an idea, make the post, right? But I post 5 times per week on Instagram, which therefore tells you I roughly have the equivalent of 5 ideas per week. I try to create a bit of content in advance. So when I go on holidays and stuff like that, so it's like I'll post like one less or something than the amount of ideas that I have because I'll save that up to the future. But how I get ideas is through a mix of ways. One is following a bunch of other people in the nutrition space. And because I feel like my way of delivering things in a way is unique, I'll just use my own words. I'll say my own thoughts. I've obviously been reading this stuff for well over a decade now. I'm very okay if I saw somebody make a post on, I don't know, protein timing, for example. I'm very okay being like, oh, that's a good idea. I should post that as well. And I'll just use my own words. And if my own words come out similarly to that person, I'll just give them credit. So I do get ideas from other people. But the other thing is like, where I'm always thinking about nutrition stuff like that. I'll think about what my clients have said. I'll think about all these things. But the bit that I'm about to get to is like the idea is the most important thing for me because that's the biggest handbrake on my content creation process. But if I'm driving home, I literally pull over if I have an idea and I write it down. It is
Oh,
the most important thing to me. I will stop whatever I'm doing and write the idea down. That's how much it matters to me.
yeah, right. Well, it's crucial, isn't it? Because
Hmm.
it's I sympathize. I relate to that in the fact that for me, it'll come in a burst, and then for ages I don't have any
Yeah.
ideas, and then my inspiration to even be on social media completely evaporates. So if you're thinking about it all the time, then how much time of that time is then spent creating the content? If you do 5 posts a week, what does each post roughly take you to put together?
Yeah, I call it about 30 minutes per post. I'd say that's pretty fair, like from start
Yeah.
to finish. I obviously do have a team that helps me with this. So obviously 10 dietitians, like some of them help me with some content creation stuff. I'll write every word. If it's like a carousel, like or an infographic or something like that, I'll write every word. I'll send it to a member of my team. They're the one who puts it together. If I do a video, like I'll have a member of my team edit the video. I'll tell them what to do. I'll tell them what studies to pop up and all these things, but they're the one doing the work. But the most interesting thing in relation to that is I've probably always taken about 30 minutes to make a post. The difference now that I have a team is I just make higher quality posts, but I've always taken about 30 minutes. And that if I was doing a video that goes like scripting through to filming through to the entire process, getting props or something like that, averages out to about 30 minutes per post.
Yeah. What do you use to edit, if you don't mind me asking?
For videos,
What
CapCut is
tool?
what it is.
Oh, CapCut, yeah, yeah.
CapCut, and I'm really big on CapCut. And the reason I'm so big on it is because I'm in a bit of a social media group. It's a paid group. I'll shout it out. The Social Circle is the name of the group, but it is full of a bunch of people who have gained big followings over the past like 2 years. A lot of them have gone from like less than 3,000 to some of them are over 1 million. A lot of them are over 100,000. And the reason why I'm pointing to that group for the sake of this CapCut thing is they all use CapCut. All of them use CapCut. And it's so interesting to me, just like the same thing with like their subtitles on their videos. They're all using the same text for their subtitles. And I don't think people are really noticing this on Instagram that a lot of people are using the same text or whatever, but it's the default text on CapCut is what they're all using. And I always look at that being like, oh, if it's good enough for all these people with like 1 million followers, it's good enough for me.
TikTok own CapCut, don't they?
They do, yes. Yeah.
So that good business move by them is that they're going to reward people that are using that. But
yeah, it's so linked in that if I edit a video on CapCut, then save it and then post it to TikTok separately, TikTok still knows that I've done it on CapCut. Sometimes it pops up with a little, this was made on CapCut kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you balance? Because the big thing for me as a dietitian is that evidence-based, because you see in the nutrition space, nutrition information, it's quite often as a dietitian, you're sighing, I can't believe people are posting this. It's not accurate. It's that clickbait kind of thing. Like, how do you balance that evidence-based approach with it also being engaging and entertaining? Because it's something that I think you've mastered the art of.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. And I'm always looking like, how could I make my content better? And there's so many things that I could do, but it starts delving into that territory of like no longer being as evidence-based and everything like that. I just think you can do the best you can. And using one of the things that I think allows me to be a bit separate from a lot of other dietitians here is I'm willing to say some stuff and also be okay with being wrong. I'll do everything I can to be as evidence-based as possible, but I'm not scared of doing my own research, coming to a conclusion, and then being wrong. Because if I'm wrong, all I'm going to do is apologize and say, hey guys, I was wrong. Super rare that should ever need to happen. But I think a lot of people are just scared to say stuff. Like they're scared to risk ever being wrong. And if you're scared to do that, it's very hard to put out information that stands out. It's very hard to put out information that stands out if you're very scared of being wrong all the time.
Yeah, that's great advice because that's science, isn't it? Science is about trying to prove theories, and then sometimes it's wrong. And okay, that's good advice for me, actually. Thanks, Aidan.
All good, all good.
Mate, you were on Facebook. You pulled back. It wasn't, and you focused more on Instagram and now TikTok. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into the platforms and why?
Yeah, so the platforms and why this comes back to that whole Gary Vaynerchuk thing. One of the reasons why I was a little bit drawn to his content was he has his flaws like everyone, but like one of the things that kind of drew me to his content was kind of stuff about how he talks about time and also effort. But a lot of people would be like, oh, TikTok's a time suck. Like I just scroll the feed. And he'd be like, okay, if you're scrolling the feed, set a timer for however long it takes you to learn and become familiar with the platform. Set a timer for how long it makes sense to do that, and then stop when you get to the end of the timer. But the other thing I was talking about with time is he talks about this concept of like 80-20. And it's if you have something that is working for you, you should probably put 80% of your effort into that. You could obviously debate the numbers and be like, should it be 80% or whatever? It's the concept. That's all I care about. And I started to go a few clients from Facebook. Obviously, I should put 80% of my effort into the thing that was getting me clients. But then one day I looked up and I was putting 80% of my effort into Facebook and 20% of my effort into Instagram. And I was growing quicker on Instagram. So I was like, oh, I don't like Instagram as much as I like Facebook. It doesn't feel as natural to me. But if I'm only putting 20% of my effort in here and it's going better, I should probably shift more effort towards here. And I'm sure you've heard the story of, speaking of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg talks about this story about when he realized that mobile was the future. He was trying to push the Facebook team to focus on the app rather than the desktop. And it was really hard to get them to change. So what he got them to do was they had to design everything for the app first. That just became a blanket rule. They had to develop for the app first because it was the only way he could get people to shift there. And for me, like the same thing with Instagram versus Facebook, because it didn't come naturally to me. It was very hard for me to shift that 80% effort over to that. I just one day decided I've got to do that. I posted it on LinkedIn and everything. I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm shifting everything to Instagram. And with the TikTok thing, I'm a little bit undecided on that now as well. But the same kind of thing, like I saw a lot of people succeeding on TikTok. I decided I should have a play around with it. And then one day, same thing, putting 80% of my effort into Instagram, 20% into TikTok, and I was growing quicker on TikTok. That seems to have slowed down a little bit, and same kind of problems about being like, it's not as natural to me as Instagram is and all of those kind of things. The other thing I'm a little bit unsold on is like whether it generates clients as effectively as Instagram. Like we know factually that if somebody had, let's say 77,000 on Instagram, 77,000 on TikTok, they would be getting more business from Instagram most likely, unless there's a few specific demographic reasons. But the point is more interesting when you'd be like, well, what if you were growing 5 times quicker on TikTok? Could you then get more business through that? So it's trial and error very much. But the one piece of advice, if I was going to summarize on a piece of advice to people, is don't just get caught on doing one thing. This is even something I talk about a little bit with my team, where it's like, where as a team, we have massively prioritized Instagram. It worked very well for us. I put money into this in many ways, shapes, and form. What if Instagram declined? Like we need to have at least some, we have to be playing around with other stuff, just to have a bit of diversity as well.
Yeah, exactly. It hasn't happened, but if you're in America, for example, and the threat of TikTok being kicked out, yeah, so putting all your eggs in one basket is a risk. How do you track where they've come from? Do you ask that question?
The clients?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for many years, my simple system was every time I'd meet somebody, I'd be like, oh, how'd you find me? And part of the reason, or every time I met a client, and part of the reason I personally just did it that way was because it also gave me a bit of a gauge of what type of client it was. Like part of the reason I was asking was because if somebody would, actually, let's use examples. I saw 2 people this morning, 2 new clients. One of them found me through Instagram. I know instantly they're on the same page with me with a lot of their nutrition thoughts. The other one I saw this morning was referred from a friend, and he's come in with a bunch of different thoughts on nutrition to me. I won't go into details in case he listens to this, but like very different thoughts. And he probably would not have followed me on Instagram for a month or so, looked at my stuff, and then decided to book in with me. Very different people. So often I would just ask people to test out because often I view Instagram as like an easier client in a way, and I don't have to convince them that my stuff is going to work because they've already decided. But we have recently added a tracking system just because I was doing that, but now I've got 10 dietitians. So all we do is in our intake form, we're just like, how did you find us? And it just says Instagram or social media. Like they write the stuff. So it's not like a multiple choice or whatever. But it's very clear, like we see Instagram heaps or social media heaps. We see word of mouth a bit. We see referrals from certain PTs and coaches and stuff like that a bit. We see Google a little bit, but like very clearly social media is the main thing.
Yeah. Are you putting money into Google as well?
We do Google ads, yeah. So I've experimented between $400 and $1,000 a week on Google ads. I'm still not sold on whether it's profitable for us, if I'm just being honest. Like we haven't tracked it super well. We're slowly improving the tracking and stuff like that. And I've had multiple phases of doing it versus not doing it. But the one bit that I'm not really sold on is like the cost to acquire a client, just being like how much. I think it comes out and going deep into the numbers. I think we can only spend about $100 on acquiring a client through Google ads, because the other little thing is our client retention of a Google ads client is lower than an Instagram client. So the average Instagram client is worth about double to us what a Google ads client is, for the reasons I just outlined before. Yeah. So we do it, and yeah, I'm even more playing around with Google ads because I think there's more opportunities here without going too deep into it. Like one thing we haven't done, and I don't think any dietitian has done, is set up specific landing pages for everything. Like we could do a Google ads thing targeted at IBS and then set up a landing page that's specific to IBS. We can do it targeted at like endurance nutrition or like running nutrition. And so we have that in the process, which is part of why I'm playing around with it. But even then I'm like, will that make it profitable? Hard to say.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So with Instagram clients, they're warmed up. They're coming to, yeah. Whereas Google is the modern version of the newspaper almost. Like they're not quite cold, but they're not as warmed up as what you could, or familiar with you as what they would be with social media.
Yeah, and even going deep on that, you could talk about a flaw in the way that we do it. And I don't think anyone else is doing this, so I'm pretty easy to expose it. But like, you can run Google ads and then have a lead magnet that warms people up. And then there's so many ways it could be done better, but that's just where we're at right now.
Yeah. Well, this is probably for another time, but we've just built these recipe ebooks that are a great lead magnet because you can put call to action buttons and services within, like there's web pages built into it. So that's what we're exploring at the moment. But yeah, there's so many opportunities, isn't there, that are still to be tested essentially. Mate, what about when it comes to your strategy for posting? Headlines, captions, time of day? Do you find any time of day is better, or do you mix it up?
Yeah, so I'm not too picky on time of day. Because I have the Australian focus, anywhere between 8 a.m. and for me, 6 p.m. is, I'll do it anywhere in that time frame. Partly the 6 p.m. cutoff is it gives people a chance before they go to sleep or whatever. And then the other thing is just so I don't have to be checking my phone late at night, like responding to comments or whatever. But Time of day, I'm not actually trying to optimize for like when my audience is most active. I've just looked at my content and been like, oh, the posts that go well seem to be the good posts. The posts that don't seem to be the worst posts. And it doesn't have anything to do with the time of day. It's just part of my logic with that. What other parts did you want to explore with that?
What would differentiate a good post?
Hmm.
Because I was looking on your TikTok, you've got, which is really interesting as well. Like you've got 9,000 followers because you haven't been on TikTok as long, but there's a post there that's got a reach of 358,000, and there could be
Yeah.
more. I mean, that was me brushing over it. So it's
Yeah.
like,
So that TikTok's a different one in that the algorithm is so much more wild on TikTok with ups and downs. Like I could do a post quite literally like this week. I did a post that got 250 something thousand, and then the next day one that got 1,000. And this is a great example of better versus worse. Like with that TikTok that got so much more. Why did it get so much more? It was just it was content that generated discussion in that example. Like so many people were commenting on that, so many people were liking. That one specifically was a lactose intolerance one. And the funny thing on TikTok was there was a lot of people just like disagreeing, basically. I don't want to get into the content. They were wrong. I was right. It's okay. It just generated a lot of discussion. Whereas the follow-up one that only got 1,000, the lighting wasn't that good. The sound quality wasn't that good. I didn't put heaps of effort into it. But the other thing is the one that was a follow-up was really the one that like adds a bunch of context and goes into nuance and closes all the loops that people were commenting on, which doesn't really leave them more room to comment and build engagement. Yeah. And the same thing with the one that got 358,000. It was one where both myself and a colleague, Sophie, were talking about strategies for if you struggle with overeating chocolate. And there were different strategies. Sophie's, which would have generated the most discussion, was she called it the 5 block of chocolate rule, which is having 5 blocks of chocolate in your house at all times. And that's an easy one to generate comments because people would be like, that would never work for me. That would I just eat all 5 blocks or whatever. And we're talking about like authenticity and stuff like that to a degree, just being like, that's a very important thing. I don't actually use the 5 blocks of chocolate rule myself. But in that video, I was able to say my piece. I was able to say, that's not a strategy I'd use. Here's what I'd use. And that also generated discussion because people could then pick sides and be like, I prefer Aidan's or I prefer Sophie's. And you can see why that did so well because everyone will have an opinion on that piece of information. But that's obviously not like the grand strategy. That's just why those did well. The grand strategy, I think, in a way, is I don't want to create all my content like that. Like that was a piece of information I think some people can try and implement in their own lives, and maybe it helps some people, maybe it doesn't. But the part that makes social media hard is like trying to put out good information that helps people improve their lives over time. If I shift it to Instagram and being like, what makes a good post and what makes a bad post, simple, easy to read or consume in video format or anything like that. Ideally, something that gives people a key takeaway is really important. If people learn something new, that's typically a good thing, but like low key for engagement, you probably get more engagement on a post that people already agree with to a certain degree.
yeah,
As an example, if I spoke about a supplement that no one had ever heard of, even if it's a really helpful supplement, it's probably going to get lower engagement because people don't know about it.
it's
They don't know if they
unfamiliar.
agree. Yeah, they don't
Yeah,
know if they agree with it or not. So they're not going to chuck a like or anything like that in case they don't agree. Like they're not going to engage. They might say, hey, I've never heard of this before. But not many people want to expose themselves like that in a way. They don't want to like, yeah, it's very easy. It's better to say this did work for me or this didn't work for me or whatever. It's easier to say that than to say I've never heard of this before.
yeah, fascinating. So you're really trying to tap into people's familiarities and things that they can relate.
To a degree. Yeah. That's a hack for engagement.
Yeah,
And that's also another little thing where I know I say good versus bad, but some of my lower performing posts are posts that I still think are very important for me to put out there. And they're not necessarily bad posts, but they'll get less engagement. Say I did find a supplement I did truly think everyone would benefit from. That doesn't exist, right? But say I did, I'd still make a post about it because the goal is to help people. And I just cop the hit on lower engagement for that. And I think that's a little bit of a secret in that I think a lot of other people aren't willing to do that.
yeah,
But the logic I kind of use is, and this is actually a pro tip for getting clients in a way, is if I give people 3 things that they're suddenly implementing in their own life, they're probably so much more likely to book in with me than if I gave them nothing. So if I did use that supplement as an example, and then they start taking it, that's one of those 3 things is how I
yeah,
view
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. No, I love that. It's the purpose is to help people. Like
Yeah.
it's, yeah, yeah. Mate, what challenges do you come across with social media?
Yeah, so the first one that comes to mind is that thing I was talking about the whole, a little bit of pressure from other people. Like I don't think about too much, but the story that I come back to a little bit is I went from 3,000 followers to 50,000 very quickly, like in a 2-year time frame. And if I could go back in time, I'd probably keep the foot on the gas a little bit longer. But I intentionally slowed down a little bit, intentionally in multiple ways. Partly because I've heard of a few people with bigger audiences talking about how like the negativity doesn't get easier just when you have a. I viewed in my head like I was imagining like LeBron James. He's copping hate all the time. Probably just brushes off because that's his life. But then I heard a few people around like 1 million followers talking about how, nah, like I still feel it. And I was like, okay, how big do I want this to be? So I decided to slow down intentionally around that time, keep posting content, but stop like pursuing growth to a certain degree. And it got interesting just being like, I had friends like for that entire journey, always just checking in, being like, how many followers you got now? How many you got now? And then one day it was like, I was at 50,000, and the next time they asked to be at 51,000 instead of 70 or whatever they expected. And it was a bit weird. I don't know. So that's one thing.
So sorry, just on that, do you get much negativity?
No, I'm actually so lucky. So on TikTok, I get a little bit, and I'm totally fine with that. Like the two examples I've used, the lactose one and the chocolate one. But on Instagram, almost nothing. And I think a reason why is because I'm genuinely just a pretty nice person. Like you'll see in the nutrition space, there's a lot of other people who call people out. And I don't want to get too deep on that as well, but like a lot of people who call people out, like sometimes they're doing it from a place of good intentions and they're trying to call out the information and stuff like that. But the bit that gets me is sometimes they like do a bit of name calling in there. I'm like, come on, you could have just like, stopped like just by focusing on the information. But I don't call people out. I don't do anything controversial. This is another thing with the engagement stuff, just being like, if I see somebody posting something I disagree with, I know I could get 5 to 10 times the engagement by using their thing and then adding my 2 cents after in response to that. Whereas what I actually do is I see their thing and I just give my 2 cents without actually naming and shaming or whatever. And I get lower engagement because of that. But you know what I don't get? I don't get hate. Like I don't get people trying to like bring me down.
Yeah. I think that's a reflection of your personality, mate. I respect that. I think that's because you're right. Like, I mean, it can be a pretty toxic place online with people and, you know, getting behind a keyboard and they'd say things that they probably wouldn't say to your face.
Yeah.
You collaborate and do partnerships. Can you give me some insight into that and your strategy around that and how beneficial it's been?
Yeah. So Instagram probably added the collab feature maybe 2 years ago. I couldn't exactly say when, but it's been pretty integral to my growth over the last 2 years. It's a major player for me. What I do is I collaborate internally and externally. Internally is obviously with other members of the Ideal Nutrition team and also with our Ideal Nutrition page. One of our things for growing our Ideal Nutrition page is once a week, somebody from our team will collaborate with the Ideal Nutrition page. They'll probably just do a post that they were planning on doing anyway, but then collab with the page so it grows that page. And it also means if somebody was only following that page, they'd also start seeing all of our dietitians. So it's a bit of synergy basically internally. If we get a new dietitian and I want to build up their caseload, I start doing collabs with them and then suddenly they gain a bunch of exposure to my audience. They grow, but then also people are more likely to book in with them. The external stuff is for growth for me. And I do see why a lot of other people don't do this from like a branding perspective and stuff like that. But I don't have a set frequency. I just try to do a couple of collabs a month, but it's not a set frequency. And I'll collab with multiple types of people. If somebody just has good content and I think we work well together, I'll collab with them regardless of their following. Every now and then I'll collab with somebody with a massive following. And that's the most followers I'll get in a day. Like I'll get like 400 plus followers in a day if I do a collab like that. And I don't know how interesting any of that stuff is with people. So I'll say what probably is a bit more interesting is my process of doing it and why I think it's been a lot more successful for me than other people is I see what other people do is they find somebody they want to collab with, they hit that person up and they say, hey, we should collab. And then they try to come up with an idea and then they try to make a post and they probably go back and forth on that post. It takes ages. And they've probably posted a lower quality post because they're trying to force the collab without the idea. I do the opposite angle. At minimum, I come up with the idea first. I come up with something that would tick the box of being a good post for myself first. And then I think, who could jump in on this? Who else could I collab with on this? And then oftentimes I'll do all the work. I'll make it from start to finish and then I'll hit up that person and be like, hey, do you want to jump in on this? You can edit anything. You can change the brand colors. I'm pretty easy. You can do whatever. Sometimes people feel bad because they're like, oh, this is not an equal transaction, but it doesn't need to be. That's the bit, like we both benefit from it. We both get exposure to each other's audience. And oftentimes they will say that they'll do one for me in return. And that's great if they do, but I have zero expectation of that. And another little thing that's part of my process is obviously if I can vouch for that person, like if I've seen their content, which in all of these cases, I've seen these people for usually at least 12 months. I follow them for at least 12 months before collabing. I will give them a shout out on my story. Once again, giving without expecting to receive. I just give them a shout out. 9 times out of 10, they'll give me a shout out back. And that's where I get the followers from. It's not even so much from the collab post, it's from the shout out. But I generally don't think anything of it if they don't do it. Like I don't even monitor it. I don't track to see if they do. But that's how it often ends up happening.
Yeah, that's a good lesson in life though, isn't it? The more you give out, the more you get back. And you don't give out to get back, but it's just how life works.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And that's also where I come back to that transaction thing. Some people are trying to get an equal transaction, but if everyone benefits, like, why does it matter? That also is the thing coming back to the follower thing. If I collab with somebody who has 2,000 and I've got 77,000, we could look at that logically and be like, that's not an equal transaction, but I'm still getting exposure to their audience. And if it's still good content that I was going to post anyway, and they found a way to make it better in some way, shape or form by even just like editing the text to be easy to read, it's a win for all involved.
I love your strategy that you create the idea first and then you find someone who can add value to that. I love whether it's an equal share. It doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah, exactly right.
Mate, this has been amazing. I'm going to sit back and watch this and learn and take some notes. You've shared so much. I'm sure we could talk forever, but I appreciate the time you've given me. So, mate, one piece of advice if you had to give to any budding nutrition entrepreneur or even a seasoned professional who's in the space, what would it be to help grow their following of useful followers?
Yeah, so a lot of what I've talked about has been really social media specific. I'm going to go another angle here, which might appeal to certain people, but I've talked about like how Gary Vaynerchuk was one of my original like inspirations. There's another one I follow heaps, Alex Hormozi, and both of them have said this thing about do first and then share. And like with Gary Vaynerchuk, he was working in the wine store and he built a business or whatever. And when he gives business advice, people are like, oh, he built a business first. Same thing for Alex Hormozi, he's built businesses and then gives business advice. I don't take it to an extreme in terms of I did start my social media straight out of graduating. And I don't think you need to like delay posting on social media until you learn how to be a good dietitian first. I don't think that's true. I think you can do both at the same time. But if you build up your skills as a dietitian, you find a way to communicate effective information to people, you help a bunch of people, it is a lot easier to do stuff on social media. It's a little reason why I always want to keep seeing clients myself personally. So I put heaps of effort into social media stuff, but taking another angle, like that social circle course I'm in, I've seen a bunch of people in there who've almost like blown up too early. There are a lot of PTs who've like just got their qualifications and they haven't figured it out yet, but they figured out how to make a video. It's pretty dangerous to watch because they don't know what they're doing. They can't really capitalize on the success anyway. And even if they did, I'd be a bit scared for it. So I know it's not like super helpful me saying this, but it's also like, you've got to be good at what you do for this to work out as well.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's great advice because it is a risky strategy otherwise, isn't it? Like it's putting the horse before the cart.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again, Aidan. I really appreciate your time. No doubt anyone listening to this, there's so many bits of information here that can help them grow. And so appreciate the time you've given up to share.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thanks, mate. Do you find this podcast valuable? There may be other nutrition professionals out there will also. If you like, share and subscribe, it's going to help other nutrition professionals make an impact on the world just like you. Thanks.